like I said the last time, I believe a sizable number of us already knows what cloud computing is. Some of us actually do not know. Some of us may be coming across it for the first time. However, cloud computing, in the simplest form of explaining it, is simply delivering computing services over the internet. That's just a simple illustration or explanation of what cloud computing is, right? Delivering what computing services over the internet. So when we talk of computing services, what are we talking about? We're talking about things like a server, things like a storage, things like a database, software and applications, things like that are what you categorize as computing services. So delivering of these services over the internet, is basically what cloud computing is all about, right? So delivering them over the internet. Another keyword there is delivering them over the internet. Now, without an internet, you might not be able to deliver these services, right? So I believe that some of us here have an AWS account, some of us have an Azure account, some of us have, a Google Cloud account. Now, what happens is this: all of the services, if you go to for instance, if you have an AWS account and you go to your management console, most of the things you see there are services offered by AWS, right? These are computing services offered by AWS, and these computing services varies from servers to storage to database, to blockchain technology, to Internet of Things, to quite a lot of services. These are services that they offer AWS, for instance, Azure, Microsoft Azure, the Google Cloud, platform. These are services that they offer. So all these services that they offer are what you call computing services, and they are offered over the internet. How? Now, take for instance, I have an AWS account. Interesting thing is this: the AWS account I have, I could just go to AWS and my AWS could log into my AWS account, provision a server there, use it to do whatever I want to do. When I'm done, put a stop. I could stop the server from running. I could even, delete it if I want, right? I could still leave it on depending on whatever it is I'm doing. The same thing with database, the same thing with different kind of services, that offer. So basically, cloud computing is what is a model, that is a model of delivering computing services over the internet. And just like I have said, this I've given an example of what these computing services could be, like your database, your software, your storage, your servers, right? So, that's exactly what cloud computing is. Now, the question is why cloud computing? Why cloud computing, right? That's the first question. Why cloud computing? I own a business, you own a business. If you're asking me to come and to toe the part of cloud computing, why should I do that? Right? Because most times, whenever you're doing something, there's always a reason behind what you're doing. Now, why cloud computing? Hi, I'm about to just look at the image we're having on the screen here. Hi, I'm about to start a company. Can you list down the resources I would need to set up on-premise infrastructure? On-premise infrastructure, right? So we are seeing two images here: on-premise, then cloud computing. Now, what is on-premise infrastructure? When we say on-premise infrastructure simply means setting up of your infrastructure, your IT infrastructure within the organization facility. That is what an on-premise infrastructure means, right? Setting up your IT infrastructure within what? Within the organization facility. Take for instance, you run an organization, and then you run an organization in a particular space, right? And then you set up your IT infrastructure in that space where you run your organization, right? That's what you classify as an on-premise infrastructure. Setting up your IT infrastructure, within what? Within your premises, within your organizational facility. That's an on-premise. But cloud computing isn't that. That is not what cloud computing is. We've already said what cloud computing is all about. It's also computing services delivered over the internet. So I don't need to have those infrastructures within my locality. I don't need to have those infrastructures within my facility, right? So, but I can make use of those infrastructures over the internet. Now, so why cloud computing? Why cloud computing? Right? That is what we're trying to establish here. Why cloud computing? Now, somebody is saying that he wants to give me a list of the resources that I need to set up my on-premise infrastructure. And somebody else is telling me that, no, instead of doing that, why not set up cloud computing? So I'm not asking him, okay, why cloud computing? Now, let's move forward. Why cloud computing? Now, we're going to compare on-premise versus cloud computing. Now, on-premise, we're having things like higher pay, less scalability, allow huge space for servers, less chance of data recovery, lack of flexibility, less collaboration, longer implementation time. Then other cloud computing was seeing things like pay for what you use, scale up, scale down, no server space required, disaster recovery, high flexibility, collaborate from widespread location, rapid implementation. Now, let me explain this. Now, when we say higher pay, less scalability, pay for what you use, scale up and scale down. Now, in the case of cloud computing, now, if I go to my AWS account, right, and I provision a server, take for instance, I want to use the server to deploy, I want to deploy an application, to that particular server. Now, I could set up a free tier, right, a T2, a free tier, yes, let me free tier. No, I'm actually operating under a free tier, what's the word again? Free tier subscription. Let me use the word subscription, right? So now I want to provision a server. Now I have a server I can provision, right? That will not attract costs on me by the virtue of the subscription I'm running on. Now, let's assume I provision a server with the least amount of resources, right? Right, because I want to deploy an application. Now, when I set up a server with the least amount of resources and I use it, take for instance, maybe in the process of doing that, process of deploying the application, and I'm not having issues of resources. Perhaps maybe my resources are not up to what is expected, right? So if I don't have enough resources, perhaps maybe that could be the reason why I'm not able to deploy my application. Now, what do? I could scale up, I could scale down. What do I mean by scale up or scaling down? I can increase the resources, right, of that server, so that the server will be able to do what I want it to do. So I could increase the resources. Take for instance, in memory, your CPU, your RAM. I could increase these resources, right, to be able to do what? To be able to meet up with what I want to do, right? So I could scale up those resources. When I scale up those resources and I'm able to deploy my application, right? Take for instance, if after I'm done and I do not need all of that again, I could still scale down. So now that's one thing that cloud computing does, which is one of the things when we say why cloud computing, that's one of the advantages you get when you are, making use of, when you are invested in cloud computing. That's one of the advantages you get. Ability to scale up and scale down your resources, right? So which is not obtainable, when it comes to an on-premise infrastructure, right? So the ability to scale up and scale down, it is one of the advantages you get when you're using cloud computing. Now, disaster recovery. Now, when we talk about disaster recovery, what do we mean by disaster recovery? Disaster recovery is simply being able to recover an item or recover something when things go wrong, right? Maybe if there's an fire outbreak in your office, and you have a lot of files. Take for instance, in your office, you have a lot of files. Let's say, take for instance, maybe you have your files. You could have the paper files and then still have them saved somewhere. Let's say saved somewhere over the internet. Take for instance, if your office is gutted by fire, do you know what happens? And all your paper files get burnt automatically. If you don't have those files as well saved somewhere over the internet, for instance, what that means is that all of those files are gone. You're unable to recover those files, right? So that is an example. Now, but take for instance, one of the things that cloud computing does for you, because ability to do what, you can also make use of storage, right? So you could store some of this your file, you could back up some of your file somewhere over the internet, right? Using one of these cloud providers. So what that does for you is that even if anything goes wrong, you can still do what? You can still recover your data. So you have this. That one with disaster recovery. So ability to still recover your data. Now, take for instance an on-premise the on-premise IT infrastructure. I'm sure you know that if I have an on-premise IT infrastructure here, maybe within my organization, if I have my on-premise IT infrastructure, if there's an fire outbreak in my organization and the entire IT infrastructure is burnt to ashes, what that means is that I don't have access to being able to do what? To recover most of my data. However, but um, if I have them saved over the internet, using one of the cloud providers and services, and I have them saved, what that does is that I've been able to do what? Recover my data Then also high flexibility. When we say high flexibility, what does that mean? We're talking about being able to access, resources anywhere on any device at any time, right? Which is not possible with an on-premise IT infrastructure. Now, high flexibility, which I just said that means that I can actually access my resources at any point in time. Now, I could log on to my AWS account right on my laptop. I could do that, go there, do a few things. When I'm done, I could drop my laptop here. I could go somewhere else just with my phone. And if there's a need for me to do what, if there's a need for me to quickly go to my AWS account and perhaps maybe do something there, I could also do that on my phone, right? I could do that on my phone, but that's not obtainable with what's it called, with an on-premise IT infrastructure. That's not obtainable. But when it comes to cloud computing, that's one of the things we mean by high flexibility. Then collaborate from widespread location. Now, for instance, I could be somewhere else. I might not necessarily be in Nigeria. I could be somewhere. Take for instance, I could be somewhere in the US, and I could still collaborate with a lot of people as well. Using one of those services. For instance, I could give 5 people. Let's take for instance 5 sets of people who maybe work together. They could have access to my AWS account. Just the same way I have access to my own AWS account, and we could work. Collaborate and work all together. Still using still, and all of these things are being done over the internet. Don't forget. So with the availability of the internet, we can collaborate and do quite a lot of things together. Now let's look at the impact cloud is having on businesses. The impact is having on businesses. When we talk about the impact is having on businesses, we can see things like average improvement in time to market, average increase in companies' growth, average increase in process efficiency, average reduction in operational costs, average reduction in IT spending, average reduction in maintenance costs. Now, all of these things, I'm just going to summarize them by saying, now, impact that cloud is having on businesses is this. First thing first, cost, cost. I'm sure you know that every organization tries to run away from, excess cost, right? Because, when there's too much cost, it affects the bottom line. It affects the company's profit most times. If the operational cost is too high, it affects the company's net profit at the end of the day. So that's the reason why every organization looks for a way to cut down on cost, right? So that you'll be able to have higher amount of returns in terms of net profit. Now, the impact that cloud is having is this. Take for instance, when I say cost, now take for instance, what it costs. Imagine what it costs to set up an IT infrastructure, right? An on-premise IT infrastructure within your organization facility. Imagine what it costs you to set up that. That runs into a whole lot of money, right? That runs into a lot of money, right? So rather than me doing that, it's a lot more better for me, right, to use one of the cloud services provider, right? It's a lot more better for me to use one of the what cloud provider services I meant to say. It's better for me to use that, right? I don't need to bear the cost of trying to set up those IT infrastructure. I don't need to bear that cost. That is not on my headache, right? So that cost alone has been taken care of. That's one. Two, if you set up an IT infrastructure, an on-premise IT infrastructure within your organization facility, part of the cost you are going to incur is IT maintenance cost. Like it or not, you continue to maintain these infrastructures. You continue to maintain this infrastructure. So maintaining of these infrastructures attract a lot of cost for you as well, right? Now, but if you are using, take for instance, like I said, I have an AWS account. Now, am I directly responsible for the cost of maintaining AWS IT infrastructure? The answer is no. Now you might want to say, okay, fine, it has been somehow included in whatever charges I am paying for the services I'm using. Don't forget, it's a different thing in the sense that now, in as much as the services has been included, in as much as the cost has been included in the charges that I am bearing, don't forget that cost is spread across a lot of customers. So it's not as if I'm the only one bearing the entire cost. It is spread across a lot of customers. So if we have 5 million people using AWS services, right? So it is 5 million of us that are paying for those costs, right? So it's not as if it's only me that I'm doing that. So now, but take for instance, when you are setting up when you have an IT infrastructure set up, an on-premise IT infrastructure set up within your organization, what happens? The IT maintenance cost becomes quite a lot. And not just that, also, another thing again, also you need to understand as well, as much as you bear that kind of cost, also your maintenance cost, like I said, then overall IT spending, as much as you spend a lot of money to maintain your infrastructure, also, you need people that will do that job. If you are running an organization, I'm not sure, maybe you take, for instance, you're the owner of the startup. I'm not sure you want to, as much as you are trying to, look for customers, you not try to start doing the problem of, trying to maintain the entire IT infrastructure. No, you have people whose whose duty is to do that. And those people will also do what, you pay them. So that also attracts cost as well. So at the end of the day, generally, one of the things that cloud has impacted has had on business is that it helps to reduce cost. And when it helps to reduce cost, that gives the organization an opportunity to be able to expand. It gives the organization an opportunity to be able to expand. Because if the costs, take for instance, if an organization is making, let's assume, revenue of 5 million and with an operational cost of 4.8 million, in essence, what the company is making in terms of profit is just 200,000. And with the 200,000, the organization will be able to expand. So that is one of the things that cloud has done. Reduce costs, reduce costs, reduce costs, which gives the organization an opportunity to grow. Now, let's look at the objectives of cloud computing. So this, I'm not sure I'll be taking much time here because this is part of what we said: elasticity, ability to scale virtual machine resources up or down. So we've said that already before. You can scale up, you can scale down. That's one of the objectives of cloud computing. Secondly, on-demand usage, ability to add or delete computing power and storage according to demand. That also, think I've stylishly said that as well. You can add more computing power, your CPU, memory, your storage according to demand. If I notice that the resources I'm having will not be able to do what I wanted to do, what can I do? And I know that I'm having resource constraints maybe on my virtual machine. What do? I could add more resources. So that's what we mean by ability to add or deleting computing power. Then pay per use, that's pay only for what you use. So I already said that as well. When you're using cloud computing services, the truth is this: you only pay for what you use, right? For instance, on my AWS account, there are services I've not even touched. There are services I'm not using. I can't pay for them. I can only pay for what I'm using. So if I need them, to provision, if I provision a server, for deployment, and perhaps maybe I also provision a database as well. So I'm only going to pay for what I use. I'm not going to pay for what I do not use, right? So that's one of the objectives of cloud computing. Then benefits of cloud computing: scalability, cost, speed, accessibility, and better security. Benefits of cloud computing is what we looked at. Scalability, we said that already. Scale up or down based on your capacity. Cost, it eliminates the expense of buying computer hardware and software, which is part of what I said also, that's one of the things that happens. Cost reduces cost. Then also speed. Vast amount of computing resources can be provisioned in minutes. Yes, that's what we mean by speed. Let me just talk on that in a minute. So when we say vast amount of computing resources can be provisioned in minutes, for instance, for instance, if for instance, if take for instance, if sorry, please, sorry, I'm having a call from Mr. Adeyinka. Just a minute, let me respond to him. Sorry, Sadinka was calling me, so I needed to just drop a message with him that I'm currently speaking at the KD. So then I was talking about speed now, and then what I said is that now, for instance, do you know that on take for instance maybe on AWS or GCP or any of these cloud provider, I can actually one of the things I can do is to do what? To provision a server, right? Do you know that as much as I can provision that server, if I want to provision a server, for instance, maybe on AWS, you want to launch an instance, I can go ahead and do what? And launch my instance following the procedures of launching an instance or following the process of launching an instance. Do you know that if that process takes me, let's assume, takes me for 5 minutes to do that. Now imagine I want to provision 20 instances at the same time. Now, what that means is that if one is taking me 5 minutes, 5 minutes times 20, that'll be 100 minutes, right? Which is about over an hour, right? That's about 1 hour, 40 minutes. That is what that would have done. Now, one of the things that benefits of cloud computing, which when we talk about speed is do you know that I can actually provision that 20 servers within that same 5 minutes, right? I can do that within what? Within that same 5 minutes. Very simple. These guys have created a platform that can help me do that. For instance, I can, there's something called, and for instance, I'm using, Google Cloud, for instance. There's what they call instance templates. Now, what the instance template does is that instance template is that I have a template, right, to help me provision my instance, to help me provision my server. That's what is called an instance template. Now, with that template, all I need to do, I can use that template to set up 20 of those servers within the same minutes, as again setting up those servers one after the other, one after the other, one after. So that's what I mean by vast amount of resources can be provisioned in minutes. So accessibility, easy to access your data anywhere. I could be in US, I could be in Japan, I could be in China, I could be in Lagos as well. But the thing is this, I could access my data, I could access my storage, I could access my database, I could access my server as well, regardless of where I am currently. Now, cloud providers, types of cloud, different, we have quite a lot of cloud providers, but we're limiting them to just these ones. Now, we have three here, which are more popular. Your Microsoft Azure, your Google Cloud, then your AWS. Then also, there's also your VMware Cloud, there's no IBM Cloud, there's also a DigitalOcean. Some of them, but the three, Microsoft Azure, your Google Cloud, AWS. Now, these three are the most popular of all the cloud providers, right? So, but these are the cloud providers that offers those computing services, right? So the companies that offer computing services are called cloud provider. Now, then let me move into this concept that I want us to understand when it comes to cloud computing. One of the concepts of cloud computing, right, is their characteristics of this cloud computing. Then there's what we call deployment models. Then there's what we call service models. There's what we call deployment model. Then there's what we call service model. Let me move. Now let me talk on the cloud computing characteristics. The common characteristics and the essential characteristics. Now, common characteristics: the resilient computing, service orientation, virtualization, geographic distribution, advanced security, massive scale. Then the essential ones: on-demand self-service, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, broad network access. Now, when we talk of on-demand self-service, what that means is this: I don't necessarily need anybody to come help me, right? To make use of these services. So there's an on-demand self-service that could help me to do what? To make use of those services, without necessarily needing the help of someone else. Then when we talk of broad network access, the thing is this: one of the characteristics of cloud computing, the network access is quite broad. Just like I said also, you could be anywhere around the world and still have access to your server or to your storage or to your database or whatever it is you're working on. Now, types of cloud computing. Now, remember, I said when we're looking at the concept, we're trying to understand the concept. We understood that there is a deployment model, then there's what? A service model. There's a deployment model, then there's a service model. Now, under the deployment model, now we have the public cloud, your hybrid cloud, and your private cloud. Now, under the service model, you have your IaaS, your IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. I'll talk on that as well. Now, deployment model, like I said, we have under your deployment model. Don't forget, This is cloud computing. Now we're looking at types of cloud computing, and we're saying that in order for us to be able to have a better understanding of types of cloud computing, we break them into two, right? We break them down into two branches, two models: your deployment model, your service model. And now we say your deployment model. What falls under your deployment model is your public cloud, your private cloud, and your hybrid cloud. Then we also have your service model. Now, then the deployment model, when we talk on the deployment model, what are we saying? Your public cloud, your private cloud, and your hybrid cloud. Now, looking at the image you have on my screen here, you can see bus, you can see own car, you can see taxi. Now, public cloud, when we say public cloud, and we're using bus as a case study, take for instance, if you want to go to somewhere, let's assume, okay, if you are familiar with Lagos, for instance, let's assume you're in Ikeja and you want to go to the island, right? So, and then what happens? Everybody comes to a particular place called a bus stop, converges at that place. When we converge at that place, what happens? A bus comes, a bus comes and signals us that he's going to the island, and all of us will move into that bus. So what happens? The owner of the bus drives the bus, and the bus goes to the island. It charges us a certain amount of money, and we all pay the same amount we give to him, and it takes us to our destination, right? That is how a bus works. Now, bringing it down to public cloud, that's exactly the same way public cloud works. The cloud provider offers services, and all of us comes to that cloud provider's platform, and we pay for the services that we want to use, and we make use of those services, right? And it's accessible to everyone. It is accessible to everyone, right? Don't forget, you have an internet, so it's accessible to everyone. If you have an internet right now, you can also just go ahead, set up an AWS account, and then interestingly, you have access to all these services as well, right? So that's the concept of public cloud, accessible to everyone. And private cloud, that's to own a car owned by a single person. That's the concept of private cloud, owned by a single organization, for instance. Now, owning a car, for instance, I'm sure the example of owning a car can sync well already. So I don't think there's any point spending so much time on that. But we just know that private cloud is owned by a single person or could be owned by just an organization, right? So that's the concept of a private cloud. Then public cloud, hybrid. So it's a combination of what? Public and private. So that's how we're using taxi as an example that can be relatable. And what does that mean? If I'm going to somewhere, I could make services of a taxi. What that happens is that I'm not the owner of the car. Don't forget, the owner of the car is charging me a premium. Why? Because it's not conveying a lot of us. It's conveying just only me, right? So it's charging me a premium. So, but don't forget, the car is still on my own. The car is still on my own. So, but it's charging me a premium, offering me a private service. So that is the way hybrid is. So it's a combination of private and this thing. So public cloud. Sorry guys, I'll soon stop so that you can ask questions. Public cloud. The cloud infrastructure is made available to the general public over the internet and is owned by what? A cloud provider. I already talked about that already. So available to the general public, accessible to everyone, and then over the internet, and is owned by a public this thing, owned by a cloud provider, AWS, Microsoft Azure, IBM's Blue Cloud, Sun Cloud. These are examples. Then private cloud, the cloud infrastructure is exclusively operated by a single organization. It can be managed by the organization or a third party and may exist on-premise or off-premise. So I talked on that already, that the private cloud is what? Exclusively operated by a single organization. However, it could also be managed by a third party. But don't forget, it's exclusively owned by a single organization. And like we said, it could also exist on-premise or off-premise. The hybrid cloud, it consists the functionalities of both public and private cloud. Let me just talk on the service model, then I stop. Then service model, which cloud service is suitable for you? Then there's IaaS, there's PaaS and SaaS. What is IaaS? Infrastructure as a service. PaaS, platform as a service. SaaS, software as a service. Now, if your service needs a virtual machine, opt for what? Infrastructure as a service. Let me check my time. 940. Now, if your company requires a platform for building software products, pick platform as a service. Then if your business doesn't want to maintain any IT equipment, then choose software as a service. I think there's a slide there that explains it, so I can talk on that, then I'll stop. The infrastructure as a service is a cloud service that provides basic computing infrastructure. By services are available on pay for what you use model. Infrastructure as a service provider includes AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Compute Engine. Users are IT administrator. Now, if the service you are providing, right, requires basic IT infrastructures, your database, your servers, your storage, then you can stick to infrastructure as a service. Now that's if what you are doing, requires that. So that is why you stick to infrastructure as a service. So it's all is a cloud service that does all that, provides basic computing infrastructures, which moves from your storage, your database, your servers, for instance, right? Basic IT computing infrastructure, and the users of them are majorly IT administrators. Then your platform as a service provides cloud platforms and runtime environment for developing, testing, and managing applications. It allows software developers to do what to deploy application without requiring all the related infrastructure. Users are majorly software developers. So what exactly does that mean? Now, it's also a cloud service, right? That's focused majorly on, that provides mainly platforms that can help you to do what? Help you to build your applications, platform that can help you develop, test, and build your applications, right? Also help you manage your applications. That's what platform as a service is. It's a cloud service that allows you to do all of that. Then software as a service. Let me just talk on that and stop. Software as a service, cloud provider hosts and manages software applications on a pay as you go. So all software and hardware are provided. All software and hardware are provided and managed by vendors, so you don't have to maintain anything. Basically, this software as a service is basically also cloud service, where that gives you that provides, the software product itself. So you basically you don't need IT infrastructure, you don't need anything. So your own is just to consume the product. For instance, your Microsoft 365. Now that's an example of software as a service. You are not paying for IT infrastructure, you are not building anything, you are not interested, you are not even in charge of the software product. You are not building anything, you are not developing anything. Yours is just to make use of the product. I think I have to put a stop here, so that this is 9:43 already. Thank you very much, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. Today, thank you so much for keeping the time. All right, so please, do we have questions to ask? We have just 1 minute for questions. Does anybody have questions around what has been said?